Virginia is hereby convened at 4:01 p.m. on this 14th day of February. Happy Valentine's Day, everybody, 2023. Members of the public will be able to observe the school board meeting through live streaming on schoolboardvbschools.com/meeting/live, broadcast on VBTV channel 47 and on Zoom. Thank you to those that have joined us in person and online. Madam Clerk, will you please announce those school board members in attendance?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Present in the Holland Road Annex Einstein Lab is Chair Riggs, Vice Chair Weems, Ms. Anderson, Ms. Brown, Mr. Callen, Mr. Culpepper, Ms. Franklin, Ms. Manning, Ms. Morton, Ms. Melnick, and Ms. Owens.
Okay, so thank you, Ms. Toniato. School Board Administrative Matters and Reports. Do any school board members have anything to share? Ms. Manning?
Yeah, if I could just ask that staff make sure that our front doors for meetings are unlocked. I just tried to come in and all the doors were locked. Where the signs that say school board meeting here, all the doors are locked, and that happens almost every meeting.
Yeah, I
So we
might
need to make
ask
sure
that-
those are open.
I might ask that we can open it at least by 3:30, guys. So when we start at 4.
Mr. Freeman's down there talking to the staff right now.
Okay, so anyway, that's important. Thank you, Ms. Manning. Okay. Anybody else? Okay. All right, so I have a couple of things that we need to talk about under this. And there is, and I'm going to start with the information that we got from City Council. And they have sent us a resolution that they presented in November. And they have sent it to us and asked us to participate in the Virginia Beach School Board upcoming disparity study. So I'm going to hand you out the resolution, and I'm going to ask Mrs. Linetti to give you some information on it, okay?
Yeah, what you're getting past that is I was contacted by one of the city attorneys who asked whether the school board had made a decision about participating in the city's diversity study. And I asked them, well, had it been sent to us? Apparently they passed a resolution in November requesting that the school board choose to participate and bear about half the cost of the diversity study. We couldn't find anyone over in the school division had received a copy of it, so I brought it to Mrs. Riggs' attention that this was something that the city wanted you to consider. I checked today what the status is. What happens with the diversity study, if you remember in 2019, the city did do a diversity study. What happens with diversity studies is to remain a viable document that you can draw information from. You really need to redo them every 5 years. That 2019 study will be up in 2024. So they're looking to redo another diversity study, which will cover a 5-year period. This time they're asking that the school board consider participating in it. You'll see in the resolution they're asking you to bear about half the cost of it. My suggestion to Mrs. Riggs was that they bring it to your attention since it had been not sent over to you to look at. And then at this time, perhaps we need to send it back to the school administration to look at it and come back with your recommendation. Obviously, you're right in the middle of budget season. This was not something you had planned for, and we probably need to look at it and determine exactly what your role would be in it. They are in the early stages of drafting RFP, expecting to go out probably in the April-May time period. So there would be time for, if the school board wanted you to participate in this and drafting the RFP, but I don't think you've had sufficient time to look at it and consider it. So my suggestion would be we hand this out to you and then have the school administration come back to you. What I did do is the city attorney's office did send me a copy of the last 2019 diversity study. It's about a 500-page document. I'm happy to pop that on to your SharePoint site. I didn't want to print that out for you tonight for 500 pages, and that you take a look at that. My understanding is that would be roughly what they would be updating this time, but they would now add the school board into that. So that would give you a better idea of what it is you're being asked to participate in.
Okay, Ms. Weems?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify. It says, whereas the city council has provided $500,000 for the second study, the school board would, they're requesting a 50-50 cost share above 500,000. So it's not half of 500,000, just wanted to clarify that. So if it's 600,000, we would pay 50,000. Does anybody know how much the last disparity study cost?
I don't. I'm assuming that if they said 500,000, they know roughly what it costs. It's something that everybody don't know what it
That
costs.
might be helpful information to see if we're looking at 500,000, 600,000, or $700,000. Just wanted to clarify that so that people didn't think we were paying half of the five.
Any other questions on that? Okay, so the other announcement.
Ms. Riggs, I'm just asking, I
I'm
think the
sorry.
direction would be that the school administration take a look at it and come back to you about this at a later date.
Is that good for everyone? Okay, yes, thank you. So the second announcement I have to make is, I wanted to read for the mini retreat that we are going to be having on the 28th of February. It will, 28th of February. Yeah, I'm going to give you all that information right now, okay? 20th of February, and it's going to start at 11. We will be serving lunch when you arrive, so 11:30 lunch, and if you get here late, you can always grab something too. And from 11:30 a.m. to 12, this is where the school board discussion, your why and your what. Why and what? Why did you run? What's your goals, you know? There's 11 of us. We have about 30 minutes. So just kind of keep it 3 minutes, 4 minutes, okay? All right. And then from 12 to 12:15, I had this later, but I talked to Joel Anderson. He said, can I do it sooner? Because he's already finished with his legislative and he needed to. I told his wife he'd be home. So I told him he could go first. So he's going to give us a legislative overview from 12 to 12:15. It's going to be short, sweet, to the point. Tell us where they are. And if you're reading the reports, you know a little bit, but if you have a question or something, you can ask him that too as well. And then 12:15 to 1:05 is the budget with Crystal Pate. And that will be, you know, if you have more questions, or she needs to add something to that she wants to tell us, and maybe an update what's going on, because maybe by the 28th, we'll get that money, you think? So anyway, if you have questions, just, you know, don't bombard her with her. Try to get them before that day. Okay, guys? Okay. And then from 2:05, no, excuse me, from 1:15 to we have a break. 1:05 to 1:15, 10 minutes, guys, because we don't have a lot of time that day. And then 1:15 to 2:05, the teacher retention. Sherwood House is going to give us an update on that. Okay? Now, these are all the things that we talked about in governance, and I asked people if you had any ideas or questions or wanted to hear, asked you for your input. I didn't hear from anybody else, so this is where it's coming from, guys, okay? So 2:05 to 2:55 is career and technical education. Kip Rogers and Sarah Lockett are going to, Dr. Rogers and Ms. Lockett are going to be giving us a report on that, on the, where we are with that, okay? And then there'll be a break then from 2:55 to 3. That's just a 5-minute. And then from 3 to 3:15, a parliamentarian discussion that Kimmy Linetti will be handling. Okay, and we'll be talking about that. That was brought up by someone, I think Miss Manning did. And then 3:15 to 3:30, way back in an email about needing a parliamentarian. Yeah, well, I mean, I'm talking about further, okay, yeah. Okay, 3:15 to 3:30, summer retreat topics. We'll be asking you guys, and Dr. Spence and I'll be doing that, asking you guys what kind of things you'd like to see in the summer retreat, which is 2 days. Okay, so you have a lot more time. Okay? And then At 3:30, we break. We have that 30 minutes before we start our 4 o'clock workshop. Any questions, concerns? Ms. Manning?
Yeah, so this is the first time I'm learning about this, and I already have something on my schedule for that date, so I won't be able to be here, unfortunately.
Sorry. We were given several dates, and we talked here on the dais about those dates. So there were only 3 available. One was the 7th, one was the 21st, and one was the 28th. So, and the 28th was the best one that came about. Everyone wanted it to be same day as we had meetings, so they wouldn't have to come an extra day. Okay. Any other questions, concerns? Okay. So with that being said, we're going to move on to the school board administrative matters and reports. Oh, excuse me, I just did that. Duh, okay. B, Title IX update. The presenters are Matthew Delaney, Chief Schools Officer, Michael McGee, Director of Student Leadership, and Robin Reese, Title IX Coordinator. Thank you, guys.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Riggs, Vice Chair Weems, Dr. Robertson, members of the board. Happy Valentine's Day to you all. We're here this afternoon to provide the board and community with information pertaining to Title IX legislation, the requirements that the school division must follow to meet the federal guidelines when conducting a Title IX investigation. I'm going to give you a broad overview of Title IX and the Title IX grievance process. As Ms. Riggs shared with me today are Dr. Robin Reese, our Title IX coordinator, and Mike McGee, Director of Student Leadership, who can provide answers to any questions you may have as well. Title IX investigations involve very serious allegations that can be extremely emotionally charged for all parties involved. Quite often, our parents, our staff, and maybe many of you as board members are not aware of the steps that must be followed when a Title IX investigation is underway. So our goal today is to provide some clarity as we see an increase in Title IX investigations, which frankly have placed an increased burden on schools and school divisions. I'd like to take a moment to remind the board of the definition of Title IX and how Title IX requirements have evolved in recent years. Typically, when we reference Title IX, most people think about it with regard to women's sports and the wonderful impact it's had on women's sports. You may remember several celebrations last year during the 50th anniversary. Adopted in 1972, Title IX prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex in educational programs or activities receiving federal financial assistance, ensuring equal access to education for all students from pre-K through elementary and secondary schools and post-secondary institutions is really at the heart of the mission of the U.S. Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights. In 2020, the concept of final rule was added to the legislation. Final rule outlines firm guidelines for transparency in the Title IX investigation. Final rule requires schools to investigate and adjudicate formal complaints of sexual harassment using a grievance process that incorporates due process principles, treats all parties fairly, and reaches reliable responsibility determinations. A school must respond when the school has actual knowledge of sexual harassment. Essentially, they've received a report or a concern that occurred within the school education program or activity and against a person in the United States. The final rule expands actual knowledge to include notice to any elementary or secondary school employee and states that any person, e.g. the alleged victim or any third party, may report to a Title IX coordinator in person, by email, phone, or by mail. So it's important to note that the Title IX process is a separate process from school-based disciplinary practices. As I shared in the previous slide, Title IX is a federal requirement that has strict grievance processes that schools are required to follow, and it outlines a specific set of associated behaviors. School discipline follows state guidelines and local school board policies in most instances. Building administrators follow the VBCPS disciplinary guidelines with student behavior and administrative response or SBAR requirements as outlined by the state. As you know, our disciplinary guidelines encompass a wide range of behaviors with a range of potential disciplinary consequences. At the February 28th school board workshop, we'll focus more on the school discipline process. For the purpose of this presentation, I want to be extremely clear that Title IX and school-based disciplinary actions involve two separate processes that work independently from one another. This slide outlines the associated behaviors with Title IX. As you can see, these are very concerning, emotionally charged behaviors, especially when you think of the age of our students. To be clear, there's really three categories that fall in line here. It's a quid pro quo, statutory offenses such as sexual assault, sexual battery, and stalking. And we talk about whether or not it's a hostile environment, which is unwelcome conduct, determined by a reasonable person to be so severe, pervasive, and objectively offensive that it effectively denies a person equal access to the education program or activity. Based on these associated behaviors, I'd like to walk you through the Title IX grievance process. I ask that you pay particular attention to the timeline that must be followed, as well as note differences from what you may know from our disciplinary processes. The first step of the formal process involves the Title IX coordinator. As I said earlier, Dr. Robin Reese is our current Title IX coordinator. She was appointed this past summer and has been essential in handling the volume of Title IX cases. Once the Title IX coordinator receives a complaint from a parent, school-based staff, or third party of an incident involving one of the associated behaviors that you saw on the previous slide, they begin the screening process. During the screening process, the coordinator will review any supportive measures that are in place or can be in place. Supportive measures could include, for example, a change in class assignment, an assigned seat on the bus, limitations in contact, or access to a staff member, to name a few. The Title IX coordinator, in consultation with the legal department, considers the need for an emergency removal for the respondent. The respondent is the individual that's been accused. Emergency removal is not mandatory, and the standard for emergency removal is extremely high. Such removal is appropriate where the school division undertakes an individualized safety and risk analysis and determines an immediate threat to the physical health or safety of any student or other individual arising from the allegations of sexual harassment justifies the removal. The removal is rare, as supportive measures can be implemented. Emergency removal is considered on an individual basis. The Title IX coordinator will provide written notification to all parties within 2 days. The Title IX coordinator will assign an investigator. At that time, the school discipline process is halted. The school, by regulation, cannot assign discipline. Again, I take you back to those associated behaviors. Prior to the start of the school year, all schools must identify one investigator that will handle Title IX cases. Several instances, they identify several administrators, but it's typically an assistant principal. As a reminder, the majority of our elementary schools have one assistant principal, so I ask you to keep that in mind as we look at the process. These individuals receive training on the grievance process. I'd also like to note that the investigator during the process cannot be involved in the disciplinary action that may occur after the Title IX investigation. The investigator is required to conduct a factual investigation. They do not make a judgment, they don't make recommendations, they don't make a decision. They summarize the facts in an investigative report, which is a specific form that they must complete as they maintain a record of procedural steps taken during the investigation. All parties are given the opportunity to review evidence and submit written response if they choose. They can view all unredacted witness statements. Unlike school-based discipline, confidentiality is not always protected. The investigator has 20 days to complete the investigative report and submit it to the Title IX coordinator. Once the Title IX coordinator receives the investigative report from the investigator, a decision maker is assigned. The decision maker reviews the investigative reports and facilitates this step during the process. Each party, again, is allowed to submit written questions for the other parties and witnesses. This process can take 10 days for them to submit. The decision maker then issues a written determination of responsibility based on a preponderance of evidence. This includes findings of fact, conclusion about whether the alleged conduct occurred, rationale for the result as to each allegation, and sanctions imposed on the respondent, and whether remedies will be provided to the complainant. They have 10 days to complete this process. I'd like to take a moment to just review, summarize the grievance process. Title IX coordinator receives the formal complaint. Investigator conducts a factual investigation. Decision maker issues a written determination of responsibility. As you can see, this process can take up to 40 days. After written determination of responsibility is finalized, schools may proceed with discipline regardless of the finding unless the decision is appealed. Again, the Title IX process and the school disciplinary guidelines and procedures are separate. I want to highlight that 40 days of an investigation when you see those associated behaviors that are part of a Title IX complaint. Both parties do have the right to appeal determination of responsibility or dismissal on the following bases. There's a procedural irregularity that affected the outcome of the matter. New evidence that was not reasonably available at the time of determination or dismissal that could affect the outcome of the matter, or the Title IX coordinator, investigator, or decision maker had a conflict of interest or bias for or against complainants or respondents. A new decision maker is assigned, and school-based discipline is halted again. This appeal process can take approximately 10 days. As of last week, we've had over 126 investigations screened by the Title IX coordinator. Out of that, we've had 28 total Title IX cases. One appeal, typical finalization of time is 30 to 40 days. We currently have 8 that are still under investigation. You may be wondering why the gap between investigation screened and actual Title IX cases. In many situations, people are okay with the supportive measures that have been put in place, or they don't want to go through that timely process that it takes to go through. Those are 2 examples why you may see that gap. Again, the goal of this presentation was to give the board a better understanding of the Title IX process. But I do really want to emphasize the strain this puts on school administrators. The timeline of the investigation can give the impression to many that are unaware of what Title IX is, especially families and staff, that the administration is not being supportive with regard to significant behavior concerns. It should be noted that Title IX investigations are just one of several processes designed to address behavioral concerns. For example, an administrator may be engaged in a bullying investigation, which involves a separate process and a separate form. Or it could be a SRT meeting, which again requires a separate process and specific documentation, along with disciplinary processes involving a teacher referral and the assignment of discipline. Again, we'll provide some overview of that at the next board workshop. In some instances, all 3 of those could be occurring in the same case. So the administrator has to figure out, with assistance from central support, is this a bullying investigation? Is it a Title IX investigation? Or can I proceed with regular disciplinary processes? I'm sharing this to ensure that we continue to be mindful of the requirements placed on our school leaders. We talk often about the challenges our teachers and classified staff are facing, which is certainly relevant. But I want to make sure that the challenges our administrators are facing, meeting the state and federal requirements, are acknowledged as well. Candidly, I feel like they're left out of that consideration. At this time, Dr. Reese, Mr. McGee, obviously Ms. Linetti from a legal perspective, and I are prepared to answer any questions.
Ms. Martin?
Am I reading this correctly in that the accused could remain in the classroom for up to 6 weeks?
It could occur in that manner. One of the supportive measures that I mentioned that can be put in place is a schedule change to remove that person from that classroom environment. There's a key component to Title IX of the due process component that people are looking at from the perspective of the accused. Ms. Linetti, you might be able to give me better clarity on that, but they could, to answer your question, but there are supportive measures that can be put in place.
There's a lot that has happened in the, what they call executive orders or guidance on this. The Obama administration came out with some very severe regulations. It basically said you were to assume that whenever a complaint is made that it's true, and you immediately had to take action against the person accused of whatever the sexual harassment or Title IX violation was. The Trump administration then came out because what we were seeing at the college level was that people were being thrown out of college, taken out, and didn't get due process rights with that there. And the Trump administration was trying to correct that. Now, if you went to any of the seminars about 2 or 3 years ago when we were doing this, it was a massive overhaul of the system. It is very, very complicated. We were then forced at the K-12 level to adopt the same procedures. Very, very difficult choices for us, and that's what Mr. Delaney is explaining to you. What they were imposing for the due process requirements at colleges works. It doesn't work very well at the K-12 level because the amount of time that you're giving each party to respond, to come back and forth on that, it makes sense in a college setting. It doesn't work well with K-12. We all knew this when it came out. It was very difficult. If you went to any of the seminars they were doing for school board members, they were trying to explain to you the burden that was going to happen for this. Not even to mention the administrative burden, because there's multiple levels of review that happen. Again, as a lawyer, I'm looking at it, I do think there was an attempt to put in due process to make the process fair so somebody could not falsely accuse somebody, and we immediately put a student out of school without a process to do that. But at the same time, it's very complicated, so the options to remove somebody who takes someone out of school are limited, and as Mr. Delaney explained to you, it's taken out of the hands of the principal, because once it's Title IX, it then goes over to Dr. Reese, and it becomes her responsibility. I'm sure she can explain to you how she makes some of this decision, but she has to weigh it. Once it's in the Title IX realm, you cannot then take disciplinary action until you've completed the Title IX procedures. So the school is stuck waiting until we complete the Title IX procedures. Then Dr. Reese has to figure out how she's going to handle, protect all the parties involved. So yes, it could be a very long period of time that somebody's there, because the entire process takes sometimes months to get through. And so that's one of the complications with this act. It was never really designed well for K-12. And we all knew that. We were just stuck with the end regulations that came out. The Biden administration is currently looking at this again. They've done out surveys. I'm aware of a number of school divisions in Virginia who've been asked to looked at by OCR, which is the Office of Civil Rights in the U.S. Department of Education, to look at this procedure. We have not been asked to participate in one of those studies yet. We fully expect that those rules may be changing again, but I can't even describe to you how complicated it was. I'm sure Mr. McGee could do it. I literally had an attorney spend the better part of 6 months developing this procedures, and Mr. McGee and the Department of School Leadership then we had to bring in hearing officers, appeal hearing officers. The person who was handling Dr. Reese's position had to be hired. Very, very complicated procedures. We are all waiting at this time to see if the Biden administration will then change these rules again. So when they talk to you about the burden of it, it's an extreme burden, and we're all very aware of it. And I'm not sure if Dr. Reese can give you any more information about what she has to do in her position, but we're pretty much on the phone daily about Title IX issues.
Ms. Owens?
Thank you. I have maybe 2 questions. The first one, does Title IX only apply to child-on-child actions, or does it also apply if it's a staff member with a child?
There's a fundamental misunderstanding about Title IX. A lot of people think it just is the athletic portion. Title IX is an amendment to the Education Act, Educational Equity Act in 1972. It actually applies to everything at an educational institution. There was a series of case law that came down, but basically it was been clarified by the courts. Anything that involves discrimination based on sex in an educational institution, which can be K-12, it can be private or public, or it can be a college setting on there. So it could be discrimination against hiring for people, so that's straight there. It can be adults on kid, harassment type of issues. It can be athletics, unfair amount of money being spent on male sports, not female sports, disparities on it. It's often associated with athletics because that's where it had a very large impact on how we do funding and things. And that's because there was an amendment in the early 1970s that was specifically dealt with on athletics that drew a lot of attention. It is more than athletics. It is any type of discrimination based on sex. The term sex has been broadened, particularly under the Obama administration, to include sexual orientation and gender identity. The Trump administration tried to pull that back. The Biden administration has made it clear that they consider that anything having to do with sexual orientation, gender identity falls under the term sex, and most courts have clarified that the term sex also includes gender identity and sexual orientation. So when you're talking Title IX, it is not just harassment, it's not other issues. Obviously, sexual harassment, sexual assault, anything like that is a form of discrimination, but it's not the only thing applied to. So getting back to your question, it could be adults on student violations, and that's commonly an area that we look at. It could be not hiring somebody based on their sex, too. That would also be a violation of Title IX.
Okay, and that was kind of what I was thinking, which leads into my other question. How does the Title IX investigative process fit into the investigative process of other agencies that may be involved? For instance, if there are police involved or child protective services, how does that fit together? I'm concerned about the interviewing of children, actually.
I will let Dr. Reese jump into here too, but I will point out to you there was little consideration given to the other agencies and processes. As you'll see, same thing in special education. Nobody's coordinated all the roles between special education and student discipline. I think Dr. Reese may be able to talk to you about specific areas that we handle.
So there are times when there can be two investigations being conducted, Title IX, and then if the police are involved, they will conduct theirs, two separate entities. So I'm going to handle mine in reference to being in compliance with OCR, and the police are going to investigate their situation according to how they are assigned to do theirs. But they may ask questions, but I do not share information with them due to confidentiality. So if they do request any of my paperwork, they will have to consult with our legal team.
Okay.
And if CPS is called, I haven't had one with CPS, but I know there have been schools to contact CPS, and thus far CPS has not been involved. They will not take it because we have not had one to the severity where CPS had to step in.
Okay, so in situations where police are involved, I understand parallel investigations, but somebody from our school district would be, for instance, interviewing a child sexual assault victim, in addition to law enforcement also having to conduct that interview with a child?
Correct, but I always share with the investigator, you cannot interview the student without the parent due to the age of the students. If the student is 18, they have the right to file on their own, but it's been the parent for students under 18 to become the complainant for the complainant, because a child cannot file. So whenever a child is being interviewed, it's always mandated that a parent be present or legal guardian.
She's talking Title IX. I will say in Child Protective Services realms, depending on the circumstances, we do not contact the parent. And this is where, as you can imagine, the facts are very important. Who's involved in it, the age of the individual involved, the nature of the charge on it, whether we could have Child Protective Services. Is it possible that we could have Child Protective Services, the police, special education or 504 while we're doing student discipline in addition to bullying and other forms of discrimination? Absolutely. You could have seven or more different realms of discrimination, and that's what the school administration's having to sort out on there. There is that possibility. So we walk a very fine line depending on the facts and the order that they come in, how those investigations are carried out. Sometimes, depending on the nature of it, you could do a joint investigation, but a lot of times they're proceeding on different tracks.
Gotcha. And it may be something that I would meet and have just additional questions. I'm thinking that there are times when there should be some coordination, particularly in situations of trauma. We should not be interviewing children over and over. The state's already said that that's not best practice, and we have CHKD that does it in a joint investigative manner so that one person is interviewing and everybody can get a copy of the interview to get what they need. And so I don't know if there's something more we can look on those, which maybe they don't happen that much.
We do take that into consideration. With the Title IX realm, interviewing the student is going to be less, the student alone is less common, as Dr. Reese has mentioned, because you usually have a parent involved in it. It's if it involved Child Protective Services where we might be pulling the student alone on there, and that has its own special rules to it.
Right. And my concern wasn't the alone or not. It's the victim having to say their story over and over, that that's not trauma informed, and there should be a better way that we can get around doing it because all the other investigative
entities in the state have a multidisciplinary team approach for that, but.
We do try to
look at
do that. That's generally coordinated to the extent we can, and depend the order or the timing between when things happen. What tends to happen in these investigations, the first time it comes in, we're looking at it in the nature of the way the claim came in. And I had this happen today, and I said, you need to get on the phone with the Title IX coordinator too. It came in as a different matter on there, and you need to call Child Protective Services and the police. So sometimes we try to limit when we can, and then we try to call the other agencies. If there's a way we can do it together, we will try to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Franklin?
Thank you. Mr. Delaney, you had actually brought up a really good point, because some of the complaints that we get from parents just on different issues, not just Title IX, but on different issues, is just the amount of time that it takes to get a response to the family. And I don't know, I'm sure that we have procedures on communication, in these type of situations, but is that just a perception by the family that there is a pretty long amount of time from the time that they issue, or they have the complaint, to getting a response from the division or from the school in general? I just feel like we do get a lot of those comments that they feel unheard, that they are, that there's too much time that's lapsed between communication and things like that, so.
Are you referencing Title IX, are you referencing discipline, or are you referencing communication in general?
Probably all three.
Well, I would share with you, typical turnaround time on a disciplinary referral that they work on is 24 hours.
Right.
And involving the parent in that case. That's the typical best practices that we look at as we share. And we'll go much more in depth in this at the next board workshop around disciplinary practices, so I don't want to go too deep into it. But they do have to do a proper investigation, they have to do due process, and they have to ensure any decision they make disciplinary guidelines, because as you know, a parent can appeal any disciplinary decision that comes forward.
Sure.
So we want to ensure in those scenarios, because it's just as in Title IX and other behavioral things, parents want to feel secure that you've done a proper investigation, and sometimes that takes time, and sometimes that takes gathering a lot of information. In terms of other forms of communication, quite often I ask people, what does timely communication mean to you is different than somebody else. I know our schools do weekly newsletters. I know they call home often with things. We try to work with our teachers to be timely in that phone call home. I know as a former principal, it was call before the child gets home so they can hear what's occurred. But I'm giving you a very general answer to a general question. But
So,
we typically see the value in timely communication with parents, and we certainly want them to partner with us in the success of their child.
Right, so as a board member, getting an email from a constituent in our district, for example, if they're saying that we haven't heard any but from administration in over 24 hours, would it be, or we hear about a complaint, would we say that please allow 24 hours to pass so we have proper time to investigate or look
I would
into the
say
matter?
that's probably good guidance, and I think also if they use the term administration generally, like in a general term, administration, that the responses, are you speaking of an assistant principal, or are you speaking about the principal? And if you've heard from the assistant principal and you haven't heard something, then contact the principal directly. And we find great success once they get involved in those scenarios and reach out to families. That's the best place to resolve it, because quite frankly, when it comes to us, we'll investigate, but it's going to go back to that principal to look into as well. So if you're looking for timeliness of communication and timeliness of resolution, it typically happens in the schoolhouse with the administration, the principals there.
Well, I would just ask that, especially since we have some newer board members, and I remember being a new board member myself, and I would just ask that we do provide some guidance, especially if we're going to go into a deeper dive on the disciplinary process, some guidance to everyone, and especially the newer school members, about when we get these kind of, communication from families, and what as a board member is a good response, that we can provide for the division as well. So, because obviously if they're emailing us directly, the last thing that we want to do is just ignore them as well, so.
No, I appreciate
Yeah,
the comment,
yeah,
because I think sometimes we need to remind parents they always have the right to appeal. And there are processes in place for them to engage in, and if we can do that as central supporter, as board members, I think that really reinforces that we do have very firm processes in place to help them that do not always require an email to a board member.
Right.
But I appreciate the comment.
Ms. Manny?
Yes, so on slide 4, it has some behaviors associated with Title IX, and obviously, looking at some of these, they're criminal in nature. If we get a complaint that is associated with one of those criminal associated Title IX complaints, do we automatically contact the police, or what's the procedure?
At the school level, if they receive a complaint associated to where police may be involved, a lot of times they always call in their resource officer, and then the resource officer will give them their information, and then the administrator will share with me that they have already consulted with the school resource officer.
Okay, great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Okay. Thank you, Ms. Reese, and Mr. Delaney.
Thank you.
Okay, the superintendent's estimate of needs for fiscal year 2023-24 and the superintendent's proposed fiscal year 2023-24 to fiscal year 2028 to 29 capital improvement program budget. The presenters are Crystal Pate, Chief Financial Officer, and Jack Freeman, the Chief Operations Officer. Ms. Pate?
So good afternoon, Chairwoman Riggs, Vice Chairwoman Weems, school board members, Dr. Robertson. I don't really have a lot today to share with you legislatively. We are going to go through a few slides just to show you some differences between the governor's budget and what's come out of crossover for the House and Senate. Both the House and Senate are pretty far apart as of today. There's not been a lot of compromise between the two bodies. So we don't have any additional information on what's going to come down the pike. We don't have any calc tools coming out of the Virginia Department of Education. So I'm just going to share this little bit of information with you, and then I'll turn that over to Ms. Woodhouse, and she's going to share some information on a new professional instructional pay grade for you to consider, and then we will open it up for any questions, comments, or discussions. So regarding the 2% salary increase, this was not included in the governor's introduced budget. We do have that, seeing that in both the House and the Senate. The retention bonus, the governor included a 1% retention bonus for SOQ funded positions. The House provided funding for a $1,000 bonus for certain regional programs, and then the Senate included a $1,000 bonus for instructional and support positions, and those are usually funded SOQ positions. On performance bonuses, the governor had a $5,000 bonus in his introduced budget for top performing teachers. Neither the House nor Senate included anything related to that. There is a recruitment bonus in the governor's budget for funds for a one-time bonus for hard-to-fill positions in certain schools. Also, the House and Senate also included that in their recommendations. On the support cap, the governor and the House, neither one moved any further in eliminating that cap. The Senate did go forward and eliminate the cap on state funding for support staff. On specialized support staff, the governor had nothing included in his budget, nor did the House include anything in theirs. The Senate did provide a state share of additional specialized support, meaning things like social workers, psychologists, and school nurses. For reading specialists, the governor included a state share of one reading specialist for each of 550 students in grades 4 through 5. You'll see on the House, there was a state share for 1 out of 550 in grades 4 through 5, and then it also included one for 150 students in grades 6 through 8, and this includes the non-general funds, means they're not using the general fund of the state, they're actually using non-general funds. And then the Senate also included in theirs a 1 per 550 students for grades 4 through 8, and additional, they're using general funds for literacy support. For English language learners and the instructors, there was not an increase included in the governor's nor the House budget. The Senate did come through with a state share of additional instructors for 24 for every 1,000 students. School security, the governor did not include anything in his budget. Both the House and the Senate do provide opportunities for security and safety and security grants that we could actually apply for. And then for lab school initiatives, there was money in the governor's budget to fund a per pupil cost for approved lab schools, and allows the Department of Education to use some of the fund for program administration. The House increased money to fund and provide up to $50 million to Division Lab schools. And then the Senate Finance reallocated lab school funding to school divisions. So that's really all I have at this point regarding legislation. Again, really far apart in those bodies. There is even comment that we already have a budget in place for 2 years when they pass the biennium budget. So if it's possible, if they don't come together, you might not see many changes at all. I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Woodhouse now for her to cover her portion of the presentation.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Riggs, Vice Chair Weems, school board members, and Dr. Robertson, and again, happy Valentine's Day. Over the past few months, the Department of Human Resources has been working with Siegel and the budget team to develop different scenarios for both the unified and teacher pay scales. As part of this work, we also discussed the possibility of implementing a new pay grade for certain instructional, non-teaching positions on pay scale grade 19 of the unified pay scale, as well as certain non-teaching positions on the teacher pay scale. This new pay grade would be called the Professional Instructional Level 2 pay grade, and if implemented, the following positions will be placed on the grade. And it includes your behavioral intervention specialist, your occupational therapist, your physical therapist, your positive behavioral intervention support specialists, school psychologists, and school social workers. Some of the changes from the old pay grade to the new pay grade include employees moving from an 8-hour workday to a 7.5-hour workday exclusive of lunch. The workday for this group of employees would be in alignment with the workday of other divisions. The new grade would also reflect the 1.3% between steps. This is the same percentage recommended for other pay grades on the unified pay scale. In looking at the new pay grade will look like, we have two options to share for your review. Please keep in mind, all options presented include an increase to the entry-level salary. Option 1 provides an entry-level salary of $52,875, up from the current entry-level salary of $51,522 for a 10-month position. In looking at the impact on the employee, for a person moving from 0 years of experience to 1 year of experience on the new pay grade, the employee would see a $2,043 increase in their salary. A person moving from 10 years to 11 years of experience would see $6,995 increase in salary. And for 20 to 21 years of experience, the employee would see a $7,333 increase in salary, and so forth. The average increase for this option is $5,461, and the approximate cost is $399,618, just slightly under $400,000. According to Siegel, this option places the division at market with peer school divisions, excluding Chesapeake, who we recognize is an anomaly. In addition, Norfolk Public Schools' hourly rate of $45 is for temporary hourly employees and does not include benefits. Option 2, the entry-level salary increases from $51,522 to $56,250 for a 10-month position. In this option, the impact to the employee's salary for moving from 0 years of experience to 1 year of experience, the employee would see a $5,463 increase in their salary. A person moving from 10 years to 11 years of experience would see a $10,895 increase in salary. And for 20 to 21 years of experience, the employee would see $11,733 increase in salary, and so forth. The average increase for this option is $10,033, and the cost is approximately $1,130,095. According to Siegel, this option places Virginia Beach City Public Schools between Chesapeake's starting rate of $40, which again is an anomaly for other peer school divisions, with an entry rate of $37.50 an hour, up from $32.20 an hour. Virginia Beach ranges for their OTPTs align with Chesterfield, Norfolk, Hampton, and Williams, James City County. Should the school board wish to move forward with either option shown here, the money would be deducted from the remaining $2.65 million from the superintendent's estimate of needs designated towards the instructional scale. And that is the conclusion for the HR portion, and Ms. Payton, I stand ready to address any questions you may have.
Ms. Anderson?
When you said, I'm a little confused on this. So you said the difference, for example, let's just take step 10 going to 11, if we went with the option 1.
Option 1.
And you
okay.
said the difference would be 6,995,000, 6,000, is that correct?
$6,995.
Is that the difference from what it would be now?
Yes, ma'am. So in the orange is the current pay scale, the U19, and then in the purple right next to it would be the new proposed starting scale, with the hourly rate moving from $32.20 to $35.25 per hour.
Right,
Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to clarify.
Yes, ma'am.
Because it's a little confusing when you say the difference, and then you look over here. So you're talking about the difference from where we are now
Correct.
to if we chose option 1, and then if we, let's say we chose option 2, the difference between steps 10 and 11 from where we are now
Yes, ma'am.
would be $10,895?
Yes,
Is that
ma'am.
right? Okay.
Because it includes a step. With everything that we have proposed this year, not only does it include what it would be from scale 10 to 10, but everything we proposed by HR that is included in the compensation study is also an experience step. So
Okay.
this one would be no different. So you would start at the 10 and then go to the 11. So wherever you are currently, you would include one additional year of experience.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
That's all I have for you.
Okay.
I do have another one. I have to go back and find it, but for Ms. Pate, but I will come back to that in a few minutes, if that's okay.
Okay, Ms. Manning? Hi. On the professional instructional level pay grade positions affected, can you tell me for the behavior intervention specialist and PBIS specialist, what is the required educational and training background for the people who fill those positions?
For all of our specialists, the experience is minimum a bachelor's degree. Many times you will find a master's degree is preferred. For these positions, if you do have a master's degree, you do receive the additional allowance. In some cases, but very rarely, we also look at experience. So if there's an equivalent enough of experience in the field as well, that could also make up for maybe the lack of the bachelor's and/or master's degree.
Okay, I'm just trying to figure out why those two are put into the professional level, because obviously, doesn't a school psychologist and a school social worker, do they have to have advanced degrees?
Yes, ma'am.
As well as the physical therapist and occupational therapist all have to have advanced degrees?
They do. Actually, all of the positions as posted require an advanced degree. So we do look at the individuals having it at best a bachelor's degree, many times preferred master's degree, and you will find in this particular group of employees, majority of them have a master's degree, plus other special certifications that may be required that comes with their positions as well.
So it's not required to have a master's degree for the behavior intervention PBIS specialist?
So as we go back and review our job descriptions, in the past, many of our positions may have required a master's degree, but also as part of the study, market study, as well as just our review, we take a look and see what are other divisions requiring. And what we are finding in some cases, not in all, that experience sometimes too is yielding higher than necessarily the advanced degrees, but not in all positions. So I can't say for every individual, but I can share the job descriptions and/or go back and send you a chart to break out what is required at each level. The reason we identified those groups, in the past, some of our groups have been on the teacher scale because the state defines who falls under the teacher scale, the teacher contract. That has caused, I would call it conflict within some of our positions. This is what brought about this conversation initially. So when we looked at professional, these were the categories, minus one that we wanted to have further conversation around, and those are our speech language specialists, taking a look at those positions, and that is why we created the professional level 2 scale. These individuals are not classified by the state as being on the teacher scale, but play a large role in supporting students and tend to yield a little higher salary than what we currently have on our U19 scale.
Yeah, I guess I'm just looking at some of these positions, thinking that we might have other positions out there, special education specialists who maybe they deserve to be on this scale if others are going to be on that. So I just want to be able to justify why we're putting these on this scale. I mean, I know occupational therapists, physical therapists, they're not in the education field. They get paid a lot more out in the civilian world. But I don't know, is that the case for behavior intervention specialists and PBIS specialists?
And so where we started, actually, Ms. Manning, was with the individuals who are already on the U19 scale. So some of the other positions, depending on what they are, and if you share those with me, I can tell you where they currently fall in terms of on this scale. And then if they are identified as the state as falling under the teacher scale, for instance, school counselors, then they stay on the teacher scale. So one of our goals and why we started this conversation is because when I first entered into HR, I heard a lot about the speech language pathologists and specialists. Why are they on the teacher scale and we're not? Well, they were once identified by the state as being able to fall on the teacher scale. That has since changed. The only difference is whenever we make a proposal, it's never our intentions to cause anyone to lose money. Depending upon what option the board elects to go to, it will impact the speech language pathologists because they are on the teacher scale. So for instance, if the school board said, okay, we would go with option 2, then transitioning them would not be a problem. They would not lose anything. If the board said, we're going to go with option 1 or no option at all, then they would lose money. It is never our intentions ever to make a proposal that would cause any of our employees to lose money. And so that is the only reason why. And also because although we've had conversations with the Department of Teaching and Learning around these groups of employees, we have not specifically talked about the speech language pathologists, but they are a group that we're closely monitoring. Our goal is to have a clean, what we call a clean teacher scale, so that when we have conversations around compensation for those on the teacher scale, we don't bring to you the problems we currently have. Well, you know what I mean?
Okay.
We've got this group and this group on that scale, and so this is where this came from.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Williams?
Yes, Ms. Woodhouse, how many employees roughly are we talking about in the professional instructional level 2?
Currently, The initial group we started with was about 199 employees. And so now, because we did some revisions, it's probably about 125 to 129, and I can confirm that number. So, and as you can see, that's why the change is kind of minimal, because they were already included in the unified scale. So it's really just the difference between what was already projected and moving them to their separate scale.
Okay. And, so you've given us two options,
ma'am.
but with really no recommendation of which one, correct, or? does
Correct.
that-
We put the options in front of you. We did have conversation, I had conversation with the Department of Teaching and Learning, with Dr. Spence and with Ms. Pate here. And the recommendation that we would love to see, obviously, would be option 2.
And also, I don't know if this is you or Ms. Pate, with the governors and the House appropriations and the Senate, the recruitment bonuses that they all three agreed on, do you know how, is that just like spread out up to local divisions, or is it certain amount for certain
Yeah, the
positions?
criteria that's listed right now is a $5,000 bonus.
Okay.
It doesn't really specify the criteria, because obviously depending on how much funding they put towards that whole program would depend on how they would get it out to divisions, but the per bonus amount's $5,000.
Okay, okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Franklin.
Thank you, and I apologize, I might have been writing when you were mentioning this, but, so these proposals, these options are on top of the budget options we had discussed last week, with the exception that that they already took into account the additional steps.
Yes, ma'am. As indicated earlier, and I know it was kind of late, one of the questions that came about, if whatever option is approved to move forward with, it would come out of the last line item that's in the superintendent's estimate of needs on page 29, and that's that additional amount allocated to instructional compensation study, and it shows approximately a $2.465 million remaining. Whatever is approved would basically come out of that
Gotcha.
line item.
Okay,
Yes,
gotcha.
ma'am.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Ms. Anderson.
Okay, I found my question. Ms. Pate, and you may not know this, but I just feel like I need to ask this anyway. Have you heard any news about the $8 million that we had to cut due to the DOC's mistake? I actually heard the governor announce on the news that he was asking the General Assembly to try to find a way to restore that money. But I'm not hearing about that from the General Assembly. Is it possible that that could be in committee, or?
Where we stand right now is in committees, they have said that for this fiscal year, which is not the 8 million, there's 64 divisions that will get some funding to make their basic aid whole, so they don't actually lose any money. We are not in that category, and our loss for this fiscal year, our cut was not that large. For fiscal year 24 in the budget we're working on, there has been no indication from General Assembly that that money is going to be restored to us at this time. So whether there's conversations going on, I haven't seen anything come through any of the listservs or any of the other news reports that that's being restored.
Okay, I think for the public's view on this, to know that, I know it was 8 million for us. And that doesn't sound like a lot of money, but that 8 million would give us an opportunity to go to option 1 without much trouble at all. But cutting that 8 million just kind of like really puts a dent in the possibility of going with option 1. And I just want people to understand that and of course, for the everyday person, 8 million is a lot of money, but in this particular budget, being that it's almost $1 billion, I know it doesn't sound like a lot for this budget, but it is a lot when we're trying to figure out if we can do a sustained salary increases that will be sustained over the years. And so, it's very important that the General Assembly realize, what happened, And it actually happened at a most inopportune time. Most school divisions, and I know we were already in the process of putting our budget together in January. I mean, it was pretty much, I'm sure you all were working on it and pretty much had it. So you then had to find ways to figure out where you were going to cut that 8 million. That's correct. So I just want the public to understand that 8 million really means a lot, and especially for the teachers that are watching, because we've had a lot of teachers who have sent us, asking for us to go to option one, and of course, I want to do that. But I just feel like that 8 million would really go a long way in helping us if we could somehow get that restored. So, calling your legislators would be a big help. Sending them notes while they're in Richmond would be a huge help, so that they could understand where we are and where we're coming from, that our teachers need to be on this option one scale, I feel like. So I just wanted to thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Brown?
Okay, sorry. And a lot of people did already ask the questions I had. Ms. Woodhouse, this question is for you. Can you please tell me what the vacancy rate of the positions that are being discussed up here is?
I would have to honestly get back with you on that. We monitor all of our vacancies, but I don't want to just give you an arbitrary number, but I could definitely look at our records and send that information back to the entire board.
And I just want to make sure because, obviously these are positions that we need in our division, but I want to make sure that when we're funding positions, that we are analyzing where our dollars go so that they can meet the needs of the most people possible, and the people that we serve. So,
And Ms. Brown, if you don't mind me adding, I'll send you not just the numbers, but the percentage, because everything is relative. So when you have a smaller group of numbers and then say you have 2 vacancies, it means a lot. I do know for a few of these category groups, we do outsource because we've had difficulties in filling the positions because of the concerns around some of the entry-level pay. So I'll be sure to share both with the entire board.
okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am. You're very welcome.
Ms. Manning?
Okay, I have a question on page 39 of the CION. Line items 8104, 06, 08, and 12. It indicates budget, either an increase or a decrease in budgeted position. For example, middle school classroom, it shows a decrease of 35 budgeted positions. Are those teaching positions?
They are teachers, and that's due to a decrease in enrollment as of the 930 numbers.
So we have an increase of 13 teachers at the high school classroom. Have we had an additional enrollment in high school, but a reduction in middle school?
That's what we're showing, yes. And of that, the 10.2, of the 13.2, 10.2 teachers are due to enrollment, and there's 3 ESL teachers for high school.
Okay, can I get the total numbers breakdown in middle school of reduction of students compared to the number of reduction of teachers? 35 seems like a lot.
It is a lot. I agree with you. It is a lot.
So, and then also technical and career education classroom, we're reducing teachers by 16. Is that at the Career and Technical Education Center?
It is, and that's in doing enrollment as well. But we can get you those numbers that show how we calculate that.
Okay, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Franklin?
Ms. Woodhouse, I just wanted to say thank you for addressing that, because I do know that when I have been talking to some of the OTs, that was, and I appreciate that the part of this group, is that they're frustrated with the fact, some are frustrated with the fact that, they are getting, they have positions being outsourced, and yet they're not being considered as a primary position to be looking at, or being looked at. So I appreciate that they are a part of this, and the fact that you had addressed that in your comments, so thank you for that.
You're very welcome. I try to explain obviously, just like you get a lot of emails, you can only imagine what we get in HR. So I try to explain to anyone who sends an email to us, we try to take a look at recommendations to the school board that impacts all of our employees. In my year and a half in HR, this is the first time, at least under my watch, that the recommendations we made impacts every employee in the district and addresses those at the lowest pay scale. It doesn't solve all problems, but I do believe it's a good step in the right direction, and I believe the options that we presented tonight will get us even further.
Okay, Mr. Callen.
Using the governor's own suggestion here as a performance bonus, moving to a $5,000 bonus for top-performing teachers, if that were to be implemented, would that be a deviation from the norm, or does something like that currently exist within the system?
I cannot speak nationwide, but for
No,
us
just
here
within
in Virginia Beach would definitely be something new and definitely out of the norm. And we would really probably have some challenges on how to even implement that. And so that probably is a whole nother conversation.
I thought I'd start with something
Watch this.
small.
It sounds great in theory. It really sounds great in theory. In theory, when I think about it, I think in terms of the fact that we have close to 5,200 teachers, and how do you determine who quite is better than the other when we have awesome teachers, all 5,200? So I try to wrap my mind around that, but it's quite difficult. So, but I do know this conversation resurfaces periodically, and it has in education. And I think the only reason it hasn't moved forward was how do you implement it, and what data points would you use to determine, in essence, because what you're saying is that we're going to award a handful of individuals who basically are more outstanding than the other outstanding teachers we already have. So yes, I'm just waiting on that one. And then, as usual, we take it in stride. If it comes forward, we'll figure it out. And but we are definitely waiting and watching on that particular one.
Thank you.
You're welcome, sir.
All I can say is good luck on that one. Let's move on. So we need Mr. Freeman with the CIP presentation.
So apologies for any miscommunication. We don't have any presentation for you, but we're happy to answer your questions.
Questions, all right. Do we have any questions on the CIP right now that he can help you with? Remember, there'll be other times too, but if you have something right now, Ms. Manning.
Thank you. So, as I learned after being on the board for about a year, this document is how we authorize funding for our projects, for our schools. So, for example, when I started asking questions about the budget on one of our schools that we had authorized, I was told, well, you approved it in this document. So I'm looking at it from that lens right now. And I'm looking at the Princess Anne High School replacement. And in last year's, that's on page 22, if anybody wants to look at it, under the tab Modernization Program. So last year, we approved $162,650 for the Princess Anne High School replacement. But the program funding now is $247 million. The Betty F. Williams School has gone up over $20 million, and the Bayside High School replacement has gone from $197 million to $385 million. And I know you're going to tell me this is inflationary and what we're going to plan for over the years, but the way I'm looking at this is if we approve $247 million, we're approving that to be funded and for that to be the cost of the school. Now, I know we have other mechanisms we have to approve for the contract and things like that, but when it comes to approving the funding, it's here. So I kind of you know, if you want to comment on that, I welcome it. But I just wanted to, especially for the new board members, as someone who didn't know that when I first came on the board, I just wanted to make everyone aware of that's kind of how the process works. Correct?
Don't have anything about the process, because you ended that with, you wanted to make sure that everybody understood what the process is. So I'm going to pause. Can you kind of restate what it is that that you'd like me to answer? Because I thought the question was going to be different than the way you ended that.
So, I mean, am I correct in that that's the process, and that, you know, the funding has gone up significantly, the recommended funding for each school?
Yes, I'll start with the second one first. So the projected dollar amount needed for the school as presented in the CIP has been adjusted due to inflation. So as a reminder, and if I get any of these dates wrong, I'm going to ask Ms. Ingram to come correct me. So 2019 was the last time that we did an adjustment related to inflation. When we came to present the CIP last year, and the PPEA was in the process at that point in time, number one, the inflation rate was very dynamic at that time, and it was hard for anybody to understand where it was. And we also knew that the PPEA was in the process, and the significance of the PPA is if that gets approved to be able to develop a comprehensive agreement, essentially there'll be a quote at the end of that, so that the projections are less useful. Now you have a quote for what the amount is. Whereas in a design bid build, you get a 30% design, and then you basically open envelopes to see who the lowest bidder is. So that's the projection. So 2019 was the last time that was done. At the last school board meeting, you got to see the inflation adjustments that got provided. Those were able to be done because we had time to go essentially contract out the work to be able to go and look at inflation and see what that is. So that's where you saw that developed inflation. So when you put those significant numbers from 2019 to today, and then project forward for when those projects will be bid, the numbers get really big. And that's why Bayside High School is out in the late 30s. That becomes a very big number when you apply inflation. It's the same thing that we tell people from a financial planning standpoint. The math is the same. However, when you look at inflation and look at the cost that's going to be incurred, it's they're big numbers, and it's hard to see, but it is the math. Mm-hmm. And so when I talk about the math, what I do want everybody to know is, so the projected inflation, that's going to differ based on who does the numbers. So, and quite honestly, in my opinion, what is less important is which number you use, that you actually are using a well-informed number for how to get there. Because one of the points that we had on the slides that we shared with you is, although we know inflation is going up, we've known it since the 2000s. We showed you projected charts. Now we have more detail on how that's done. What has not gone up is funding. And so we're trying to show the difference in spending power when the funding stays level or decreases and inflation is going up. So I'm going to get to your second question here in just a second. So really, that's the significant part. Now, I do also want to make sure that we're being fair, that, and this came up when we briefed City Council last week, really why that's significant is in 2008, as we talked about before, prior to that year, lottery funds were designated to go to schools and construction. It was on the order in the 2000s between 7 and 10 million a year that we were getting in those monies. And those were going up over time. So I don't want to say that they were perfect in line with inflation, but you can imagine if those numbers continue to go up from roughly 2008 until now, that's a substantial amount of funding that could have been used for schools. So that's a little bit of the background of the inflation and the reason why we're kind of sharing information related to inflation. Now, I'm going to circle back to your first question about the process. Can you refresh me on that one so I get it right?
So when we vote on the CIP, this is the funding mechanism. Our vote is funding these programs and what's in this document.
Yes. So, yes, for the next year.
Right.
So for the next year, that will guide where we are going. And in a design bid build format, and likely even if city council will look to approve the PPEA, then there will be adjustments made next year. So I guess the significance of that is your concern is, hey, you just went up this huge amount of money. If we approve this, we're saying that everything in this document is good for 1 year. And then if something changed over next year, inflation numbers that significantly changed, or other things that are related to what are currently in there, which make us provide the estimate, we would update those things next year. So it's going to get updated on an annual basis.
Right. So, looking at the VDOE's construction cost estimates of schools that were built, Henrico had a high school built that was reported in '21 with a capacity of about 2,000 students. Total cost was about $89 million. The cost in last year's CIP for Bayside High School with less capacity of 1,800 students was $197 million, and now it's $385 million. So I just don't see how we're going from an equivalent school built in '21 at 89 million to now in '23 funding for 385 million
Well,
for a smaller school.
a large part of that is due of when that is going to be projected to be able to be bid. So that's not going to be bid until the mid-30s. So we're comparing something that was bid 15 years prior roughly. So that's the cost of inflation. It's not all of it. And we're going to take a very close look at the numbers because there's been a lot of discussion around cost per square foot per student and how we're building them related to our student size. There's some good conversation to have in and around those types of factors as well. But a large portion of that is related to inflation. The numbers for 2021 school are going to be substantially different than a mid-30s school, even if they're exactly the same. One final point that I'll make on that. So we shared a slide with you last time. I wish that I had it. It's the bar graph that it showed high schools. And it had a straight line, which was roughly a 5.4 straight line from the early 2000s. And then there was a curved line. And that curved line was to show that, well, hey, since about the early 10s, it's not a straight line. It's going up more. On that slide, there were two schools from Henrico. Tucker, forgetting the other one. So they were design bid build. So those two schools, they're prototype schools. They're essentially the exact same schools that were built. And they were $20 per square foot different. And they bid, it was within the same month. I want to say it was a week apart, but it was within the same month. But the low bid came in $20 greater for one school than it came in for the other. So I share that only from a standpoint of there are a number of things that we can control and there's things that we can't control. And that's an indication of, in a design bid build process, one thing that we can't control. So I'm willing to keep, have I effectively covered what some of your concerns are related to that?
Yeah, I mean, I still think we're budgeting too much, way too much. Because I also noticed that in the PPEA proposal that we received from Ballard, the number that was given for the estimated cost of the school was exactly what we were funding and authorizing here.
Right.
So I almost feel like, we're putting this number out there, we're telling the bidders, hey, this is what we're willing to pay. And I'm not willing to authorize $385 million for Bayside High School right now. So.
Yes, ma'am. And that authorization wouldn't come until the mid-30s if we went design bid build. With you, so let's talk about the PPA. The number that was on the PPA was essentially that their original projection could be at the guaranteed maximum price of on that $428. I have the book in front of me. So yes, that was part of that, and that was part of the so the time frame that was that proposal was put together was on a year and a half ago in the ballpark, and knowing that number would likely be updated when we got more information. But that was, to your point, it was exactly what we had in the CIP for those three projects. Your point is well taken of we publicize what we're projecting those dollar costs to be. We do. And by design of the process. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, Ms. Franklin?
Well, and I just want to make a comment as well, because my husband's actually in purchasing for an international company, and he just got a 40% increase on with a vendor that he typically has worked with for over 20 years, and basically when he balked at it, he went and searched for other vendors for competition's sake, and they said you should take that. The cost of inflation right now is real. But what I'm going to ask you though is that I assume that maybe when the market corrects and things come back to hopefully back to where a normal inflation would look, that we're going to not pay these costs. Then we're going to obviously account for the fact that we have we're not just going to say, hey, we've approved this budget for the cost, the CIP of the CIP, but because we approved it, we're just going to pay that. That's not how this works, right?
The numbers that were presented last week, so there was a chart that you had that started from 2020-ish and then went down and projected numbers out. So you saw some pretty big numbers in the early years, and then it kind of steadied out into some cases, 6.18 standing out in mind for the other. And so roughly a year or two from now, the math that was done stabilized that at a consistent rate over time. So that big number is not so much of a factor related to an oversized and unrealistic inflation rate that's already been calculated into the process. Now, to your point, if we learn more and there's an adjustment, we would adjust. We would account for that. Now, that being said, even that 6.18 number that's off of one of the groups, that's not substantially off of the 5.4 that we have been briefing you guys for years, which was the straight line inflation. And we didn't actually put a number to that curved line, which projected, visually that there was going to be a greater inflation amount. So it's already calculated in, but if we do see adjustments, those would be made. A percentage point can make a huge difference when you're talking about 15 or 20 years, but probably not as much difference as we would all like.
Well, actually, I just wanted to kind of just make that comment, but my real question to you is, I had a constituent just ask me about this budget, and, I think that competition is incredibly beneficial and healthy. For example, the cost of corrective eye surgery used to be $5,000 to $8,000 per eye, and now it's much cheaper than that because we have several different, doctors doing that now, and creates competition. And it pulls away from having one person have a monopoly on that. So with that being said, one of the comments was that Ballard, and I think that probably because they're accustomed to doing these type of projects and the scope of the projects, they can understand where the efficiencies can be put in to the process and stuff like that. So that does give them a slight advantage. Is there any way that we can insert some verbiage that states that they need to create some work for subcontractors so that experience can be spread out a little bit to create more of a healthy competition in the future? I'm just wondering if that is a possibility. I'm not sure if we have any control over that or not, but I'm just curious because it would be nice if we could especially create more of a diverse type of competitive system in the future, so to speak.
So I'm going
Maybe-
to invite Ms. Ingram up here to answer part of that question, but there already is language in, I believe, in there related to small women-owned and minority businesses and the
Okay, good.
subcontractors
All right.
associated. These are huge jobs.
Yeah.
There's a lot of subcontractors on these jobs.
Right, exactly. That's why I wanted to make sure that we could utilize
If you remember that.
some of this opportunity to.
And that's a great question, Ms. Franklin. So all the PPEA non-proprietary information is available online currently. And I think that does include some of their partnerships that they're working with. So you can certainly look at that. And that would be for both offerers. SB Ballard Construction Company was one offerer, and Heartland Jordan teamed up together to put in an offer as well. And their information also is available.
Okay, great, thank you. I'll definitely get back with
Ms. Anderson?
I have a couple questions. Start off with, Mr. Freeman, you mentioned, the lottery funds in 2008 were allocated for construction. There's a lot of public who do not understand what happened, because they'll say to me, we still have the lottery. We're still using the lottery. What happened? I know. I know that there are people out there who want to know, hey, I buy lottery tickets every week, and I know the lottery's still creating money. So, I know what happened, but could you explain it to the public as to what happened in 2008, that the lottery funds are now no longer going directly to construction costs?
Yes, ma'am. I'll give it the first go, and then if anybody wants to update me, because I'm not necessarily the expert on this, but this is what I've learned over time. So roughly about 2008, when we had the financial crisis, the general fund was relatively deficient in funds, and the lottery fund had substantial sums of money in there. So my understanding is elected officials at the state level looked at that and said, hey, this is all state's money, but it's being cordoned off in a way that isn't working for the state at this point in time, and made the decision to take that and make it all part of the general fund. And now there wasn't any designated lottery funding for schools. In addition, doesn't appear to be any accounting for the fact that that money was no longer flowing to support that, and there hasn't been that type of funding come from the state since then. So Ms. Linetti or anybody else that...
It was my understanding that the General Assembly decided to use the lottery money to supplement school funding. So they could cut back on what they actually put into school funding. They use the lottery funding to supplement what they put into the general fund for school funding. So they basically cut school funding without cutting school funding, but that's really what it amounted to. And people don't realize that. We still get the lottery, and the lottery can still say, they say it every year when they do their little awards and stuff. Yes, we gave so many million to the schools for school funding. But the General Assembly still has not, even though times are better now, they have not decided to stop supplementing the general fund with the lottery money. And so basically, if they took that lottery money and put it back into, school construction, and then they had to replace that money in the general fund, then they would have to add a lot more money out there. So people don't quite understand that. The general public does not understand at all what actually happened and what the General Assembly did to schools in 2008. And they haven't tried to fix it since then. The other thing that I wanted to point out was that, as I'm looking at this handout that we got a few weeks ago, for example, Princess Anne High School, approximately $162,650, compared to Highland Springs High School that was built in Henrico County, and their cost was $77,400,000. So, does their cost include everything that we have in our cost?
So I'm going to let Ms. Ingram give you the details, because the costs are often not comparable for what gets
Correct.
included.
So I think the public needs to know that too.
Yeah, so thank you for the question, Ms. Anderson. You are correct. So when you're talking just school construction cost, you're talking about the construction. When we do our project budgeting, we look at the whole project funding. So that includes any overhead costs for permits, inspections. It includes furniture, fixtures, and equipment, which is technological equipment as well. It includes design costs. And a lot of times what you'll see is those costs are broken out separately. We did just, one of the schools that just bid recently, George Wythe High School in Richmond, just bid for $543. So the inflationary impacts to school construction costs are real. We are experiencing them every day, and one of the reasons we did increase the budget after it hasn't been increased this last 2 years is because it is just a reality out there that we need to be ready for. Again, after the recession in 2008, Great Neck Middle School was a school that bid, and we had an inflated budget as well for that school construction. We were well under budget when we went down to bid it, saving $17 million in the school construction costs alone. So I think we will continue to look at inflation as it does impact school construction. As you saw, we, listed everything out that we understood from our consultants. I definitely got sticker shock as well when I looked at it, but the numbers are very real, unfortunately. And one of the reasons that we did look at the PPEA is because it's a possibility for cost savings due to economy of scale and other aspects that the PPA offers that a design bid build wouldn't. So that's one of the reasons that we're working towards that in unison with the CIP projected funding as well.
Thank you.
Can I just do a follow-up to that one as well?
Yes, please.
So related to the state construction data, so it's the best data that we have, but one of the challenges with that is it's only as good as what's input into the system. So what I mean by that is, for example, schools put that information into the system, and there is no oversight to that. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but it's something to recognize. And also, if schools divisions don't go back in and update it, so say for example, if they had originally done something and then contractor says, hey, can't do it for this, you need to supplement the process. If it's not updated, there's no way for anybody to be able to see what that additional cost that was incurred.
Oh.
One final thing about that, and I didn't catch it, she may have said it, but so when we have a high school that needs to be built, you have to put students somewhere. So you're sitting in a high school right now, which is a likely candidate for being able to do that. And currently it's an office building. So this is going to need to be updated into a school building. That's another cost that is part of what we've included in the calculation that would not be included by school divisions when they input data onto the state tool.
Correct. So, okay, thank you. I appreciate it, because it's really not a complete comparison.
No, it's not.
When you're comparing the costs, let's say in Henrico, to what we're doing and what they have implemented and what they have input in their cost aspect.
True, and we can format it in a way to make it comparable, knowing that, hey, these things, and that's what has been attempted to do that, of, hey, here are the other things, and here's the place where we can compare with what other school divisions are putting into the state website.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Brown?
So I don't know if there's another opportunity to discuss this during the formal tonight, and if there is, I'll yield my time and ask my questions then. Is that something we're doing tonight, or? No, okay. I know everybody's eager to get to the break. I am concerned about the square footage. Princess Anne High School, the proposed square footage is 342,000 square feet. Our current square footage is 228,860, with an increase of 114,000. Capacity was shown in 2018 to be 1,945, and our current capacity is over at 1,708. I don't suspect that capacity is going to go up, but when you correspond this document to our SOQs, it shows that we're going to need 7 more new custodial positions just to clean these schools also. And so I'm a little bit concerned about the size as it is relative to the maintenance and the staffing support that is necessary. And if the cost per square foot is high, I would think that we would look for some reduction. And I know there was some discussion in the joint CIP modernization committee about as it goes to square footage value engineering, but I don't see, and I know, it's not been a long time since then, but I don't see that in here, and that's just 7, that's just Princess Anne High School. When you go over to Bayside High School, we're gonna need another 8.5 custodial positions, and they're already understaffed. So can you speak to that, maybe?
We're going to pay a lot of attention to that in all the things that are related to the expense in the school. And we're going to, so your question is fair of, are we building the right size school for what we need? And we're going to continue to take a hard look at what do we really need related to square footage, and to explain why recommendations are being made related to that square footage, including what services that school might be providing that are unique. So as you know, Prince Anne High School has a substantial portion of their school that's related to our more profound special needs. And what that really means is more square foot per student in those cases. And Bayside is in an area where we're seeing, where we're going to take a really good look at our population. I'll just put it in those terms, because although we see declining numbers across the city, that's not necessarily the case when you look at certain areas of the city. So we're paying a lot of attention to that. Your concern is shared.
And I mean, if you compare Kellam High School's size to the old Kellam High School and the amount of student base Kellam High School is now serving, the student base size has not increased in the last decade, but the school did increase almost 150,000 square feet. So I'm not really sure that we're utilizing our square footage in a manner that is most efficient. So I just wanted to make that comment.
Okay, thank you. We appreciate it. One last thing that I didn't say during the administrative matters. I sent out an email about a position needed, an at-large position on the governance. I got no response except from Mrs. Jessica Owens. So we're going to come back at the next meeting on the 28th, where I will recommend Jessica. Okay? And I just want to let you guys know that up front. Okay? We are finished with the workshop.